I just know you're ready to hear about a little crime. Welcome to Crime Daddies.
All right, everybody. This podcast discusses real crimes, real investigations, and real people. Some of the cases that we cover involve murder, violence, tragedy, and circumstances that are anything but funny.
That said, we occasionally cope with the darkness by making jokes.
Right, and so our humor is intended to add commentary, personality, and sometimes just a little bit of levity to difficult stories. It is never intended to make light of victims, survivors, or the suffering that they experienced. Whenever we make fun of something, the target is generally the ridiculousness of a situation, questionable decisions, incompetent behavior, bizarre circumstances, or, whenever appropriate, the people that are responsible for the crimes.
We recognize that behind every case is a real person whose life has changed forever, along with families and communities who continue to live with the consequences.
Right, and the information that we present is based on available public records, reporting, court documents, historical sources, and other materials we find along the way. Details may be disputed, incomplete, or subject to interpretation, and obviously anyone that is discussed as a suspect or accused person in these cases should be considered innocent unless proven guilty in a court of law.
We are not investigators, prosecutors, defense attorneys, or psychic mediums with a suspiciously good success rate.
We're just two dads with two microphones. So if dark humor isn't your thing, we completely understand. Trust me, we get it.
If it is your thing, buckle up.
This is true crime with a little gallows humor along the way.
Listener discretion is strongly advised.
Welcome back to Crime Daddies, everybody. My name is Jacob.
And I am Hunter.
And we are back for another episode, another week, some more stories. And these stories are from you guys. So that's right, it's another tip line episode. These cases are from you, for you, and we're going to hop in. But before that, I'm going to just say a quick thank you. In the past few weeks, you guys have shown us a lot of love, and I just want to make sure that never gets forgotten. But without further ado, Hunter's going to bring us a case, and then I'll wrap it up.
All right, everybody. Missouri is a state filled with stories. Stories passed down through generations. Stories told around kitchen tables. Stories shared in small towns where people still wave as they drive by and where neighbors often know when something feels different. But every state also has stories that remain unfinished. Stories where families are left waiting. Stories where investigators are left searching. Stories where one question continues to echo. What happened? Today we are looking at 3 Missouri mysteries. 3 different cases, 3 different lives. These stories are different, but they share something important. Behind every investigation is a person, not just evidence, not just headlines, not just a case number. A person with a family, a person with memories. A person whose life mattered. The first one we're going to be talking about is the story of Gail Sherry King. Before a person becomes part of an investigation, they have a life, a routine, a family, a story that existed long before anyone knew their name. In southeastern Missouri, there was a woman named Gail Sherry King. To the public, she would eventually become known because of a horrifying crime. But to the people who loved her, Gail was something much more. She was a wife, a mother, a daughter, a friend. She was a woman who cared about children, a woman who enjoyed her faith, a woman who loved sports, someone who could sit down after a busy day and enjoy reading about football or baseball. Those simple details may seem small, but they are details that remind us of who somebody truly was, because victims are often remembered only because of what happened to them. But Gail had a life before tragedy, and that life deserves to be remembered. This story begins in Essex, Missouri, a small southeastern Missouri community where life moved at a different pace, a place where people knew their neighbors, where family connections ran deep, where ordinary routines mattered. The 1980s were a different time. There were no smartphones, no instant notifications, no social media posts spreading information within minutes. When somebody disappeared, people relied on phone calls, newspapers, and word of mouth. And in April of 1987, that community would suddenly find itself searching for answers, because Gail King would leave home for what should have been only an ordinary errand, and she would not return the way she left. On April 20th, 1987, Gail traveled to West Park Mall in Cape Girardeau. Her reason was simple. She wanted to retrieve a jacket that she had left in her vehicle while shopping. It was the kind of everyday task most people would never think twice about. Walk outside, go to the car, grab something, return home. But sometimes the moments we consider ordinary become the moments that everything changes. When Gail returned to her vehicle, she encountered a man who would alter the course of her life. According to reports, she was confronted at gunpoint and forced into a terrifying situation. A normal shopping trip became a nightmare. A woman from a small Missouri community had been taken, and suddenly, the question everyone was asking was, where was Gail King? When Gail did not return home, concern quickly turned into fear. For her family, the waiting began. The questions began. Where was she? Who had taken her? Would she come home? Investigators began working to understand what happened. The community hoped for good news, and after days of uncertainty, Gail was found alive. She had been released near Springfield, Missouri, and discovered walking along U.S. Highway 60. For a moment, there was relief. A woman who had vanished had returned. A family had their loved one back. But surviving the crime would not mean the nightmare was over. When people hear that someone has survived a violent crime, they often focus on the moment of rescue, the moment they are found, the moment they come home. But survival does not end there. For Gail, the physical danger may have ended, but the emotional damage remained. Her family described the impact the ordeal had on her, the fear, the nightmares, the anxiety, the struggle to return to the life she had before. Because trauma does not disappear simply because someone makes it home. A parking lot can become frightening. A simple trip can become overwhelming. A memory can return without warning. Gail was trying to rebuild a life that had been changed forever. Investigators faced a difficult challenge. The person responsible had not been identified. The most important witness was Gail herself. She provided investigators with a description of the man who had abducted her. According to reports, he was described as a white male, approximately 6 feet, with a slim build. She described brown hair that was parted to the left side. She also described dark plastic rimmed glasses with a shallow ridge or mark on his left cheek. A composite sketch was created. Authorities hoped someone would recognize him. Someone would remember seeing a person matching the description. Someone would have information investigators needed. But despite those efforts, no arrest came, and the mystery remained. For Gail and her family, the most painful chapter was still ahead. Only months after surviving her abduction, tragedy struck again. In July of 1987, Gail King was reported missing again.
Again?
Again.
Good Lord.
This time, there would be no return home, no second chance, no reunion. The woman who had fought through fear and survival was gone. Authorities searched near the rural Essex home, and investigators eventually discovered Gail had died. A speculated drowning later determined to have been a homicide. A community that had once celebrated her survival was now mourning her loss, and the questions became even harder. Was her death connected to her abduction? Was a person responsible still out there? Who had taken away a woman who had already endured so much?
That is so strange to go through it, be found, safe. I mean, traumatized, but safe. And then you said just a few months later,
Yeah.
she just winds up missing again, and then this time dead in a ditch.
Yeah. I mean, it's strange as it sounds. It's true. And I'd never heard about this until one of our listeners actually wanted us to cover it.
Right.
So
That's so surprising. I don't know. I mean, most of the time, whenever you talk about someone who's been abducted and they come back, they just deal with lifelong trauma and everything. But you never hear about it happening twice. Like getting abducted is very rare. And for it to happen 2 times, to go missing twice, I don't know. And then to end up dead, there's a lot of questions.
for Gail's family, grief was mixed with a determination to keep searching for answers. They wanted justice. They wanted accountability. They wanted the person responsible to be found. But beyond the investigation, there was something else they wanted people to remember. They wanted Gail remembered as a person, just a victim, not just a case, not just a headline. They wanted people to remember the woman who loved children, the woman who loved her family, the woman who enjoyed sports, the woman who had ordinary days before tragedy entered her life.
Right.
Because Gail Sherry King was more than what happened to her. She was someone, she mattered, and her story remains one of Missouri's most haunting unanswered mysteries. All right, this next case I'm going to talk about is the unsolved mystery of Alton Lake Jane Doe. Every investigation begins with a question. Sometimes that question is, who did this? Sometimes it is, where did they go? But in one Missouri case, the question investigators have been asking for more than 5 decades is even more basic. Who was she? On a cold February morning in 1968, 2 fishermen headed toward Alton Lake in Missouri. They expected an ordinary day, a quiet morning on the water, a chance to escape the noise of everyday life. But instead of finding peace, they discovered something that would become one of Missouri's most heartbreaking mysteries. Floating near the south end of the Lewis and Clark Bridge along U.S. Highway 67 was a black suitcase. At first, it appeared to be abandoned luggage. Something lost, something forgotten. But when the fishermen pulled it closer, they realized it was no accident. The suitcase had been tied shut with blue clothesline. It had been weighed down. Inside and outside were exercise weights, 4 10-pound weights apparently used in an attempt to keep the suitcase beneath the water. Someone had tried to hide what was inside, and inside that suitcase was a little girl, a child whose name has never been confirmed, a child known only as Alton Lake Jane Doe.
They don't know who this little girl is or who she belongs to?
Not a clue.
Did no one report a little girl missing in the area? Like, what the heck?
I'll get into it.
Oh my gosh.
On February 1st, 1968, the fishermen noticed a suitcase approximately 12 feet from the shoreline of Alton Lake. Using a stick, they pulled it from the water, but what they found inside immediately turned a quiet morning into a homicide investigation. Inside was a body of a young girl. Investigators estimated she was between the ages of 2 and 3 years old. They believed she had been in the suitcase for several weeks. The discovery raised immediate questions. Who was this child? Where had she come from? Who had known her? And how did she end up abandoned in a Missouri lake? In unidentified victim cases, investigators face one of the most difficult challenges imaginable. The victim cannot tell their own story. They cannot provide their name. They cannot identify their family. They cannot explain what happened. Investigators are left searching for clues, small details, pieces of information that might eventually bring a name back to a person who lost everything. The child found at Alton Lake was described as white. She was approximately 2 feet 8 inches tall. She weighed between 35 and 40 pounds. She had long, strawberry blonde hair. She was believed to be between 2 and 3 years old. Investigators also noted distinctive features, including an unusually large tooth and a scar above one eye. To investigators, those details were not just descriptions. They were possible keys, a way to unlock the mystery of who she was. The autopsy provided some information, but it also created more questions. The examination was conducted through the St. Charles County Medical Examiner's Office. Investigators determined a child had likely been dead for weeks before she was discovered. However, the exact cause of death could not be determined. There were no obvious signs of trauma. Drowning was considered as a possibility, although investigators noted there was not a significant amount of water found in her lungs. The case was ultimately treated as a homicide, but the most important question remained unanswered. Who was this little girl? Who had cared for her? Who had held her hand? Who had heard her laugh? Who knew her name? Shortly after the discovery, investigators received information that briefly offered hope. A man contacted authorities believing the child might be his missing daughter. He told investigators his 3-year-old daughter, along with the child's mother and a sibling, had been missing for approximately 8 weeks. For a moment, there was a possibility that investigators had found the answer. A family might finally know what happened. A child might finally have her name returned. But after examination, authorities determined the girl in the suitcase was not his missing daughter. Another possible connection disappeared, and the little girl remained unidentified. Years passed, then decades. The little girl in the suitcase remained known only by the circumstances surrounding her death. But every unidentified victim had a life before becoming a mystery. Someone once cared for her. Someone once comforted her. Someone once knew what made her smile. Someone once knew her favorite things. Somewhere there was a story that belonged to this little girl. But investigators did not know where that story began. As technology improved, investigators continued looking for new ways to identify the Jane Doe. In 2015, her remains were exhumed in hopes of obtaining DNA evidence. The goal was to compare genetic information with families connected to missing children from the 1960s. It represented a new opportunity, a chance to use modern science to solve a mystery that had lasted nearly 50 years. But investigators were unable to obtain usable DNA to create a profile. Another possible path toward identification closed. But the search did not end. There is something especially heartbreaking about unidentified child cases. A child's entire identity can become reduced to a few details: height, weight, hair color, a scar, a dental feature. But a child is never just those things. This little girl had a personality. She had a voice. She had a future. She had someone who should have been looking for her. Somewhere there may still be someone who remembers, someone who knows what happened, someone who can finally answer the question investigators have carried for decades. Who was she? The story of the Alton Lake Jane Doe is not only about solving a crime, it is about restoring dignity. It is about giving a child back the identity that was taken from her, because every person deserves to be remembered, not as evidence, not as a mystery, not as a headline, but as a person, a little girl, a daughter, someone who mattered, someone who deserves a name.
I don't like these stories you're telling today, Hunter. They're breaking my heart.
Yeah,
These are some hard ones, dude.
lots of tragedies have happened in the state of Missouri.
And I don't like not having answers, you know? Even whenever I watch shows like Unsolved Mystery, I have to stop at some point because I get so frustrated whenever there's not conclusion. Because, like you said, people are far beyond the details in a police report. You know, there's so much more to that little girl than her age, her height, her weight, her hair color. Like you said, she's a little girl. She had personality. She had a laugh. She had family. But all those things are completely removed. And as far as anyone knows, she's just a case file in a drawer somewhere, and that's heartbreaking.
Very heartbreaking, and unfortunately, it's true. Still, as of today, they have no idea who she was.
I hate that. I hate that so much.
So we're going to get into the third case I'm going to be bringing you. And this case is over the disappearance of Megan Latham. And I actually had this case submitted to me from someone on TikTok one night. And I actually got to speak with her brother and got a little bit of more detail about her and about the circumstances. So
that's interesting. So you just came across this guy on social media?
No, I was actually in a TikTok live with some other people that handle disappearances and true crime stuff, and they were talking about her case, and then they said, "Hey, you're from Missouri, aren't you?"
Yeah.
I said, "Yeah," and they told me the location of this, and I said, "That's crazy. I've been in that area a lot because I've been like to Elephant Rock and stuff, which is in this area."
Right.
And they were like, "Well, would you cover this on your podcast?" And I said, "You know what? Absolutely."
Yeah, I'm glad we can do that for them. That's awesome. So you said you talked to the brother involved?
Yeah, one of the people that was in the live actually is from that area too.
Right.
And they actually contacted her brother and got him on the phone on the live, and he was just telling us different stuff about the disappearance and who she was as a person and whatnot.
That's awesome. Yeah, I want to hear about it. That's awesome that we have someone so close to it being able to give us information. That's always nice to have people involved fill us in on things that reports might not have.
Right. When someone disappears, the first question everybody asks is, where are they? But before that question can be answered, there is another question that deserves attention. Who are we looking for? Because a missing person is more than a photograph, more than a name on a flyer, more than a case number. A missing person is someone's child, someone's parent, someone's friend, someone whose absence changes the lives of everyone who loves them. In April of 2026, a Missouri woman named Megan Latham disappeared from Washington County. And since that day, her family, investigators, and those searching for answers have been left with the same question: where is Megan? Before Megan became the subject of a missing person investigation, she was living her life. She was not just a case file. She was not a headline. She was a person, a mother, a daughter, a friend. She was someone whose family knew her voice, someone whose loved ones knew her personality, someone whose absence left behind an empty space. Photographs shared in connection with the search show Megan as someone with a strong connection to her children and the people around her. Those are the details that matter, because when someone disappears, it can become easy to focus only on the mystery, the timeline, the investigation, the unanswered questions. But behind every missing person case is a life that existed before the disappearance. Megan was last seen on April 17, 2026 in the Cadet, Missouri area of Washington County, according to information released about her disappearance. Cadet is a rural Missouri community surrounded by wooded areas, country roads, and small towns. Places where people often know the landscape around them. Places where a familiar vehicle can stand out. Places where a person's absence can quickly become noticeable. Information released in connection with the case described Megan as approximately 5 feet 5 inches tall, with long dark hair and blue-green eyes. She was known to spend time in Washington and Iron counties, and after she disappeared, the search began. For many families, the first hours after someone disappears are filled with uncertainty. At first, there is hope. Maybe plans change. Maybe communication was lost. Maybe there is a simple explanation, but as time passes, fear begins replacing hope. The question becomes harder. Where did they go? Who were they with? What happened? Megan was reported missing on April 21st, 2026. The Washington County Sheriff's Office became involved and information was released asking the public for assistance. In missing person cases, investigators often rely on something extremely important: people. Someone who remembers something, someone who noticed something unusual, someone who may hold one piece of information that helps complete the picture. One of the most important parts of any missing person investigation is understanding time. Investigators begin working backward. They ask, when was the person last seen? Who saw them? Who spoke with them? Where were they going? Who were they around? What was happening in their life before they disappeared? A timeline can reveal patterns. It can eliminate possibilities, and sometimes it can point investigators toward the answer. But a timeline is only as strong as the information available. That is why every detail matters. Many missing person cases are solved because someone decides to make a call. Someone remembers a conversation. Someone notices a vehicle. Someone recalls seeing something unusual. Sometimes people hesitate. They think, somebody else probably reported it, or I'm not sure if it matters. But investigators often say that information that seems small can become important when combined with other evidence. A detail that appears meaningless alone may become a critical piece of the investigation. As what happens in many missing person cases, questions and theories have surrounded Megan's disappearance. Some individuals discussing the case publicly have raised concerns about possible criminal activity or situations involving dangerous individuals. However, those claims remain unverified. They are allegations and theories, not proven facts. And that distinction matters, because when a real person is missing, speculation can sometimes create more confusion. Investigators must follow evidence, confirmed information, witness accounts, facts. The goal is not to create a story. The goal is to find Megan. One difficult reality in many missing person cases is that victims are sometimes judged by the challenges they faced in life. Public discussions about Megan have included references to personal struggles. But a person's hardships do not make them less important. They do not make them less deserving of compassion. They do not make them less worthy of being searched for. Every person has a story. Every person has struggles. Every person has value, and every family deserves answers. The landscape of Washington and Iron counties creates unique challenges for investigators. Rural areas can include long stretches of road, wooded land, private property, limited cameras, fewer witnesses. A person can disappear into a landscape that covers miles, but rural communities have something powerful. People who know their surroundings, people who notice when something does not belong. A vehicle parked somewhere unusual, a person seen in an unfamiliar place, a detail that seems ordinary until investigators realize it may matter. While investigators work, families experience a different kind of reality. The world continues moving. People go to work, children go to school, life continues. But for families of missing people, time feels different. Every phone call could bring answers. Every message could bring hope. Every day without their loved one is another day filled with questions. For Megan's family, this is not an old story. It is something they live with every day. One of the biggest fears in missing person cases is that people will stop looking, that the photograph will disappear, that the story will fade, that a person will become just another unsolved case. But Megan Latham is not just a case. She is a person. She is someone's mother, someone's daughter, someone's friend. And until answers are found, her name deserves to remain remembered. Many missing person cases eventually move forward because someone chooses to speak. Someone remembers, someone decides that information they have been holding on to may finally matter. Sometimes the smallest detail creates the biggest breakthrough. A conversation, a location, a memory, a moment someone thought was insignificant. That is why investigators continue asking, if you know something, say something, because one piece of information could help bring someone home. The story of Megan is still being written. There are questions that remain unanswered. There are details still being examined. There are people who continue searching. And somewhere there may be someone who knows something, a detail, a memory, a piece of information that could change everything, because every missing person deserves the same thing: to be found, to be remembered, to come home. Every unsolved case leaves behind questions. Questions investigators ask. Questions families ask. Questions that sometimes remain unanswered for years. But there is another question that deserves just as much attention. Who was the person we lost? Because behind every investigation is a human story, a life that existed before the headlines, a person who had dreams, a person who had people who loved them, a person who mattered. Tonight we have followed 3 Missouri stories, 3 mysteries separated by time, 3 lives forever connected by unanswered questions. Gail Sherry King, a woman who survived an unimaginable ordeal only to have her life taken months later. The little girl known as Alton Lake Jane Doe, a child whose name remains unknown, waiting decades for someone to tell the world who she was. And Megan Latham, a Missouri mother whose family continues searching for answers. Different cases, different circumstances, but one shared truth. These are not just mysteries, these are people.
Yeah, like you said, 3 very different cases, but all similar in the same ways that there's a lot of questions unanswered. And, that's the hardest thing about cases like this is because there is no conclusion, right? And it weighs heavy. But if you guys know anything about true crime and cold cases, is that even after 10, 15, 20, 30, 40, 50 years sometimes, answers can be found. So nothing is out of the ballpark. Like these stories may have an ending someday.
Yeah, they just linked DNA evidence to one of Ted Bundy's victims not too long ago that added to another count of his list.
Yeah, from like 40, 50 years ago, right?
And it was all DNA evidence.
So I know it's really hard to be discouraged whenever we hear these stories and just think of these victims as just another cold case sitting away in a file, but there's real opportunities that some things can come along.
And to add on to Megan's case, when I was talking to her brother on the phone, he said that her last known contact was with a guy that she had been seeing,
Right.
but the brother 100% does not think that he was involved. At least that's what he said on the phone at the time.
Yeah.
And that she just vanished, and her brother and law enforcement has searched, wooded areas in the surrounding, but still no answers.
Right.
And Megan was a mother to 2 small children, and she also worked as a nurse.
Right.
I mean, she was a productive member to society, and I think that we all need to keep searching for her because her case is still very fresh.
Yeah, let's not shut the door on Megan or anybody. If we can find Megan, or if we can find the name of Jane Doe, or if we can find what happened to Miss Gail Sherry King, I don't think we should shut the door on any of them. I think these are 3 cases that still deserve eyeballs on them. And I know that we don't have a large reach here at Crime Daddies, but we have a steady community. We have a good local following, which is really awesome.
What I love about our older generation of people that listen to us is, for one, they're very loyal and they, interact with us a lot, but
Right.
they also tell us stories and cases of things that I've never heard.
And that matters big time. Things that just fall by the wayside that people haven't talked about in forever, they let us know, and it's good information.
And for anybody that's listening that has suggested a case, you'd be surprised at how many cases we have been suggested.
Right.
So don't think that we're just purposely not covering your case. It's more along the lines of we're just so overflooded with cases that we're trying to put different, stories together that can flow with each other. Like these 3 I did tonight, I did it in a way that was an unsolved murder, an unnamed victim, and then somebody that's missing.
They're 3 different on paper types of cases, but they're all similar to the point where there's a lot of unanswered questions, which is why we do this. And before I get into my tip line case, I want to just say this is the time where we could use your guys' help. Like I said, I know we're not huge, but we have you local listeners, and you guys know people. And like Hunter was saying earlier, whenever you live in rural areas, you pick up on things. You know people, you know areas. And so even if you might not know something, it's as easy as just hitting share on this, and maybe somebody that does know something hears this. And there may come a day when the right person hears one of these episodes and hears the names or remembers something, and it helps bring answers to a family that has gone far too long without answers. But for that to happen, we really need your help. So remember their names, share the stories, and if you know anything at all, contact the proper authorities. But just put this out there, and we'll see if we just someday down the line, we'd like to see resolutions to the things that we talked about today. And without further ado, everybody, I'm going to go ahead and hop in to my case for the tip line today, which was suggested to us through our Google form. So if you guys are interested in adding anything to this, go ahead and suggest that, which you can find a link to that on socials and our website at crimedaddies.riverside.com. If you've ever driven through Stoddard County, particularly southern Stoddard County, you probably passed through Bernie without giving it much thought. Blink while you're heading south on Highway 25, and you can really miss it. It's just a one-road town, not even a stoplight. Today, it's a town of fewer than 2,000 people, but back in the mid-1980s, it felt like the center of the world if you happened to call it home. Bernie wasn't the kind of place where everybody locked the door before bed. It's like a small farming town. If you've ever been past it, you just see endless fields of cotton, soybeans, or wheat, and sometimes rice. Hell, my first job, whenever I was 12 years old, was working for some farmer in his bean fields, and I was just with my hoe and my grandpa, and we were just out there. And by hoe, I mean tool, with my trusty hoe and my grandpa just cutting weeds out of this guy's field for $10 an hour. And I was 12 years old, and $10 an hour at 12 years old, untaxed. I felt like I was a millionaire.
Yeah, Bernie is such a farming rural town that their school mascot is a mule.
Literally.
And that's not to throw any hate. That's just to give people that's not from our area that listens like an idea of like, this is a farming community.
It's all about farming. There's not much else there besides the farms.
In the town next to Bernie, Malden, their mascot is the Green Waves. So that just shows you how much of a farming community this area is.
Right. This is, it's right off the hill, right off the ridge that we have here. And it's all flat, very fertile farming land, because long ago, Southeast Missouri used to be called Swampeast Missouri because it was a swamp. And then they brought in a lot of land and made it really good, fertile crop country. And so there's a lot of things that get grown in this neck of the woods.
And if you didn't know, your crime daddies are very fertile too.
Lord have mercy. We're called crime daddies for a reason. But if you know anything about Bernie, life kind of moves slower there. Kids ride bikes until the streetlights came on. Neighbors borrow tools without keeping score. The local diner doubled down as the town's news station, where conversations over coffee spread faster than any newspapers could. In a community that size, privacy was hard to come by. Good news traveled quickly. Bad news traveled a lot faster. Now, back in the 1980s, it was a very interesting time across SEMO. Agriculture still drove much of the economy. A lot of manufacturing jobs were beginning to change. More factories were coming to the area, and small towns like Bernie were adapting to a decade that looked very different than the one before it. Yet despite those changes, one thing remained constant. People believed they knew their neighbors. Crime existed, but violent crime still felt like something that happened somewhere else in St. Louis or Memphis or on the news, not down your own street, right? So whenever something did happen that was terrible, it didn't affect one family. It affects the whole town. People remembered where they were when they heard the news. Businesses paused, churches filled, people looking for answers. Rumors spread almost as quickly as facts. And before long, nearly everyone had an opinion about what happened and why. That's the backdrop for today's story. The story of Rosemary Taylor Sisk. Rosemary was born on May 23, 1945, in Morehouse, Missouri, a little town pretty close to Sikeston. Like so many people from Southeast Missouri, her life was rooted in part of the state. She eventually married Willard S. Sisk, and together they built a family that included 4 children. Those who knew Rosemary knew her not as a headline, but as a mother, a widow, a coworker, and someone trying to make a living for her family.
So she was just a all-around, all-American, small-town girl.
Right. And after Willard's death in 1981, Rosemary was left continuing raising the children by herself while trying to navigate life on her own. By 1986, Rosemary was 40 years old, still living in Bernie. She worked at Ridgeview Manor Nursing Home, a job that demanded patience, compassion, and long hours caring for the older generation. Whenever you care for elderly residents, it's not really glamorous work, right? It doesn't make the headlines, but it requires someone willing to put the needs of others ahead of their own day after day.
So far, this lady just sounds like an angel. I mean, she's continuing on with life after a tragedy that she endured.
Right.
And she's raising the kids. She's working, and she's working at a nursing home, taking care of the elderly. And, you know, that involves a lot of patience and a lot of kindness and a person that has to have a good heart.
Yeah, she was the stereotypical down-home country woman that just put a lot of things above her own needs, and she did it with grace. Now, according to her obituary I found online, she was also active in her Baptist faith, Another thread common in SEMO, especially in Bernie, there's probably 2,000 residents and probably 5 Baptist church. So pick and choose which one you're going to. So faith, family, and hard work were just really the defining parts of her life. Based on what I've seen that survives in historical record, Rosemary appears to have been exactly the kind of person you'd expect to find in a small SEMO town. Someone known more for quiet living rather than trying to seek attention. By all accounts, Rosemary's world revolved around ordinary things: work, children, church. Trying to build a future after losing her husband just 5 years earlier. There was nothing about her daily routine that suggested she would one day become the subject of a newspaper headline across SEMO. But that's often what makes some of these cases so unsettling. The victims aren't living dangerous lives, right? They don't expect violence. They're simply going about another ordinary day until, bam, without warning, that ordinary day becomes the last day of their life. And for the people of Bernie, March of 1986 would become one of those moments they never forgot. Before the investigation, before the courtroom, before anyone tried to answer who was responsible, there was simply a 40-year-old mother named Rosemary Sisk. And within a matter of moments, the quiet life she'd spent decades building would come to a sudden and violent end. By early 1986, Rosemary Sisk wasn't alone anymore. Sometime around 85, she began a relationship with a man named Sammy D. Vincent. The two eventually moved in together, sharing a home in Bernie along with Rosemary's 16-year-old son Darren. On the surface, it may have appeared to neighbors that Rosemary was simply beginning a new chapter of her life. She had been widowed since 1981, and after the death of her husband Willard, she was raising 4 children, working long hours, and like anyone else, she deserves companionship and another chance at happiness, right? But behind closed doors, the relationship that she had was beginning to unravel. Court records show that Rosemary and Sammy had lived together for a little more than a year. During that time, their relationship became so troubled that Rosemary and Darren actually moved out of the home for about a month. Although they eventually returned, roughly 2 weeks before the shooting, it appears the issues between the couple had never truly been resolved. There was another detail that few people in Bernie likely knew. Mr. Sammy D. Vincent carried with him an extensive criminal history. Years before arriving in Southeast Missouri, Vincent had accumulated convictions in Illinois that included 2 rape convictions, an attempted murder involving one of those victims, and convictions for motor vehicle theft.
Before you go any further, why do these scumbag predators always find their way into amazing people's lives?
Because amazing people are amazing and they give everybody opportunities. As sad as that sounds, whenever you have a heart of gold, you try and see the good in people, even a scumbag, right? Those convictions would later classify him as a prior and persistent offender under Missouri law, something that would significantly increase the punishment he faced down the road. Whether Rosemary knew the full extent of his criminal past isn't exactly clear. It's the 1980s. Information isn't as easy to get as it is nowadays. Nowadays, if you meet somebody, it's as easy as going on CaseNet and looking them up and seeing all their history. If you want to pay $15, you can find just about anything about anybody online, right? But what is clear is that in March of 1986, the people closest to her knew something was wrong. On the morning of March 10th, Rosemary visited with her brother, Bert Taylor. Bert noticed something that immediately caught his attention. Much of Rosemary's personal belongings were still in a garage, almost as though she wasn't fully settled back into the home that she was sharing with Sammy. Now, concerned, he asked if her things between the two had finally been worked out, and she said, not really, everything's still kind of on edge. According to Bert's testimony, Rosemary described Sammy as being crazy jealous. And we all know a violent past paired with jealousy doesn't lead to a lot of good things, now does it, Hunter?
No, he already sounds like an over-controlling, insecure, diabolical piece of crap.
Right.
Scumbag. I mean, he's got the exact predator profile that all these pieces of crap men have that take advantage of these very vulnerable, angel-sent women.
You're right on the money. And then she told her brother something that at the time probably sounded like another troubling update in an already difficult relationship. She told her brother Bert that Sammy had threatened to kill her. Now, as an older brother to 6 younger sisters, if my sister came to me and said some guy threatened to kill her, then I probably would not be on this podcast right now. Hunter be talking to me through a through a glass pane on a cell phone. It would not be like it is right now. And I'll just put it to you that way. As a big brother, red flags go up immediately.
Especially since we're so in tune with crime itself.
Right.
Like, you don't just come out, you just do not come out and say that to somebody like, I'm going to kill you, because there's got to be motive and intent behind that, speaking it out loud.
Right. It's not a common thing to say when you argue with your spouse.
I have never told my wife that I would do that.
Dude. Never. So, nothing but red flags are going off. Now, as the day wore on, life continued as normal. That evening, her son Darren remained at the house while Rosemary and Sammy spent time together elsewhere. Court testimony indicates that they traveled in separate vehicles but were together throughout the evening. Both had been drinking before eventually returning home. Rosemary arrived home first sometime between 9 and 9:30 that night. She briefly left again before coming back, and then a short time later, Sammy came home as well. Eventually, the two went to bed. Everything seems pretty normal. It should have been the end of an ordinary Monday, right? But instead, it became the beginning of a homicide investigation. Sometime later that night, another argument erupted between the couple. During that argument, Rosemary revealed something that would dramatically escalate the situation. Earlier that day, she had spoken with a man in Alabama named Jack Matthews. According to testimony later presented in court, Rosemary told Sammy that she agreed to leave Missouri and move to Alabama to be with Jack Matthews. Now, whether she intended to follow through or whether those words were spoken in frustration to make Sammy mad, it's impossible to know today, but we do know that it was brought up. But what happened next is documented in court records. According to Vincent's own statements to investigators, he got out of bed, got himself dressed, and he walked outside. He exited through the backyard gate. Then, for reasons he would later explain during the investigation, he turned around and went back inside the house. This time, he retrieved a .38 caliber revolver. He walked back outside. Rosemary followed him into the yard. The argument continued. Then, bam, a single gunshot rang out. The bullet struck Rosemary in the abdomen. Vincent would later tell investigators that he had fired toward the house, intending only to frighten her. Prosecutors rejected that explanation, arguing that the physical evidence and the circumstances surrounding the shooting showed something far more serious. Ultimately, the jury agreed with the prosecution's version of events. Whatever Vincent's intent may have been, the outcome was devastating. According to his statement, he immediately heard Rosemary say, "Sam, I'm hit." Whenever he looked toward the porch, she had collapsed. Inside the home, Rosemary's 16-year-old son, Darren, heard the gunshot. He rushed outside to find his mother gravely wounded. Unlike many offenders who flee after committing a crime, Vincent stayed. He carried Rosemary into his pickup truck and instructed Darren to get in with them. Together they drove to the Bernita Police Department, where officers immediately summoned an ambulance. Emergency responders transported Rosemary to Dexter Memorial Hospital, and there, Dr. Ronald Hill and the surgical team began emergency surgery shortly after 2:30 a.m. The bullet had ripped through Rosemary's abdomen, severely damaging her liver, pancreas, spleen, and one of her kidneys. In an effort to save her life, surgeons removed part of her liver, part of her pancreas, her spleen, and one entire kidney. For nearly 2 hours, doctors fought hard to keep her alive. And despite every effort they made that night, the injuries were proved too severe. During the early morning hours of March 11th, 1986, 40-year-old Rosemary Taylor Sisk died from the gunshot wound. And by then, Sammy D. Vincent had been arrested.
I will say this. This is probably going to be second-degree murder if I was to, just going off what you told me so far based on the evidence.
Based off the evidence and what he said.
And I am honestly very, very surprised at the level of guilt and remorse he had. Like, I did not expect you to tell me that he immediately got her son. They loaded her up, pretty well gave himself up.
Right.
And all that. Like, I 100% believe that he was going to try and take off and run.
I think that's what he's saying. And unfortunately, in cases like this, we don't have the other perspective, right? Poor Rosemary wasn't around to say what happened.
Now, I do not think that he was just trying to shoot the house, because was she up on the porch?
Yes, she was on the porch and he was walking out, and she stepped out. They're yelling back and forth. He said he turns around and shoots just to scare her.
Well, see, if you're firing a warning shot, you always fire it like up above your head.
Right.
So, like, if he pulled the gun and he was looking at her, he had to have had it below eye level, pointed towards her.
Right.
So I don't believe that story at all, that he was just trying to fire a shot to scare, because, listen, I've shot a lot of guns,
Right.
and, it's not hard to miss your target.
And
If you fully intentionally was wanting to miss your target, it is not hard to do that.
And who, in the heat of argument, when you're arguing with your significant other, decides to shoot a gun to warn them?
Well, some people don't need guns because they don't have the self-control.
Well, the following morning, while he was sitting in jail, deputies informed him that Rosemary had died. Now, what had begun as a domestic disturbance in a quiet neighborhood of Birmingham became a murder case. The investigation was only the beginning, and before it was over, prosecutors would paint a picture of jealousy, threats, and violence that a Missouri jury would ultimately believe. By the spring of '86, the investigation was complete. The gun had been recovered. Sammy D. Vincent confessed to firing the shot. Rosemary Sisk had died at Dexter Memorial Hospital, and now the case would be decided by 12 jurors. Before a jury was ever seated, something unusual happened. They moved the trial. Because of the publicity surrounding the case in Stoddard County, and like we talked about, small towns talk a lot, and so whenever you want to find 12 jurors that are going to be impartial, you need to move court cases. And that's what happened. A judge granted a change of venue, transferring the proceedings to neighboring Butler County and Poplar Bluff. Prosecutors believed it was the only way to ensure Vincent received a fair trial. Then, another unexpected twist. While awaiting trial, Vincent failed to appear for a scheduled court hearing.
They let him out on bond?
Right.
Why?
I'm sure because the charges, it's 1980s, right?
Did the guy have a lot of money?
I don't know. It doesn't ever talk about his finances, right? It doesn't really give any detail about what he did. But eventually they located him 2,000 miles away in Orange County, California. Butler County deputies traveled across the country to bring him back to Missouri, although newspaper reports noted that the expense was ultimately borne by the person who had posted his original bond. When the trial finally began, prosecutors laid out a straightforward theory. This wasn't a tragic accident. It was the predictable end to a very abusive relationship. The state argued that Vincent had become enraged after learning Rosemary intended to leave him and move to Alabama with another man. Rather than walking away, they said he made a series of deliberate decisions. He walked outside. Right, Hunter? He was already leaving. Then he walked back inside and got his revolver. Walked back outside, and then he fired. Vincent never denied pulling the trigger. Instead, his defense centered on one claim. It was an accident. Jurors watched videotaped statements that Vincent had given. In those recordings, he insisted he had fired only to scare Rosemary. According to his version of events, he had waved the revolver over his shoulder and fired a random shot without aiming. The physical evidence told a different story. Dr. Ronald Hill, the surgeon who operated on Rosemary before she died, described the devastating injuries caused by the bullet. It had passed through her abdomen, severely damaging liver, pancreas, spleen, kidney, and then a large portion of those organs had to be removed. Prosecutors also introduced photographs documenting both the entrance and exit wounds. Perhaps most importantly, investigators focused on the bullet's trajectory. Based on measurements taken during the investigation, prosecutors argued that the bullet traveled downward through Rosemary's body. That's pretty significant. If Vincent had truly fired blindly over his shoulder while walking away, the downward angle made little sense.
Makes no sense if she's on the porch and he's off the porch.
Right. Over your shoulder.
It would be pointing up.
Up. Instead, prosecutors argued the trajectory was consistent with someone standing on the porch and intentionally fired towards Rosemary as she stood below. The jury also heard testimony that Rosemary had expressed fear before death. How just that day she told her brother that Vincent was crazy jealous and that he had threatened to kill her. Taken together, prosecutors argued that physical evidence, Vincent's own statements, and Rosemary's warnings painted a very clear picture. It wasn't necessarily accidental. The court thought it was murder.
Oh, I do too.
And so after the deliberation, the Butler County jury agreed. In late 1987, Sammy D. Vincent was found guilty of second-degree murder in the death of Rosemary Sisk. A few weeks later, the case returned to court for sentencing.
Life in prison without the possibility of parole.
Judge Rex A. Henson sentenced Vincent to life in the Missouri Department of Corrections. But his judgment wasn't based solely on Rosemary's murder. During sentencing, the court learned far more about Vincent's past. He had, again, previously been convicted in Illinois of 2 rapes and attempted murder in one of those rapes, and the different cases of motor vehicle thefts. Based off those convictions, Missouri classified him as a persistent offender. Under Missouri law at the time, a life sentence was legally considered 50 years. Because of his persistent offender status, Vincent would be required to serve at least 60% of that sentence before becoming eligible for parole, meaning he faced a minimum of roughly 30 years in prison. The sentencing hearing revealed something else. According to a pre-sentence investigation, probation officials concluded Vincent had showed little remorse over Rosemary's death or the impact her murder had on her children. Vincent and his attorney disputed that finding. They also criticized the pre-sentence investigation, arguing that it failed to include statements from people Vincent believed supported him. The judge, however, remained unmoved. The life sentence stood.
So do you think when he loaded her up and took her to the hospital, it was over remorse or over the fear of getting in trouble?
I think it is the fear of getting in trouble.
I do too now.
I think he knew he did something stupid.
Take back what I said now.
I think knowing his prior convictions and the fact that he's violent and he's tried to kill somebody before and he's raped 2 people, right? I think it's in this guy to do it, and he just wanted to cover himself because he knew he just fucked up big time. So yeah, the life sentence stood. But, and this is a little bit disconnected from this case, but in a pretty strange coincidence, another high-profile criminal case concluded in that same courtroom that same day. So, not that I told the story before, but if you guys are around here, you might have heard of Donald Ray Johnson, a guy that received a 10-year prison sentence after pleading guilty to selling cocaine to an undercover police trooper. Whenever I was reading a newspaper clipping, I forgot which newspaper it was. It was based out of Poplar Bluff, but they put both of these into one article, and they said 2 high-profile cases concluded in the same courtroom by the same judge on the same day. Pretty much meaning that Judge Henson, he stood on his word. That guy would lay down the law, right? Even after the verdict, Vincent refused to accept responsibility. Instead, he began appealing his convictions. His attorneys argued prosecutors had failed to prove Rosemary's death because no autopsy report or death certificate had been introduced into evidence. They claimed the jury should have been instructed on voluntary manslaughter rather than second-degree murder. They challenged testimony presented during the trial, and they argued that Vincent had received ineffective assistance from his attorney. The Missouri Court of Appeals carefully reviewed every claim, and the judges rejected all of them.
That's what he gets.
Right. Regarding the unusual argument that the state had failed to prove Rosemary died, the appellate court acknowledged no autopsy or death certificate had been introduced. However, the judges explained that Missouri law allows a homicide to be proven through circumstantial evidence. The court pointed to multiple pieces of evidence: photographs showing Rosemary's injuries, medical testimony describing the gunshot wound, officers discussing her death in the night, her brother referring to her as the deceased, and Vincent's own recorded interview where deputies informed him that she had died. Taken together, the court ruled that was overwhelming evidence that Rosemary's death and its cause had been proven beyond a reasonable doubt. The appellate court also rejected Vincent's claim that he deserved a voluntary manslaughter instruction. Judges noted that no evidence of the kind of sudden, uncontrollable passion required under Missouri law. Instead, they said that Vincent had plenty of time to reflect. Again, he leaves the house. He could have just left. If he was that mad at her, he could have just left. But he went back to the house, got a firearm, walked back outside, then shot it. Hunter, if he didn't plan to use that gun, why'd he go back inside to grab it? He could have just left.
He may have wanted a power control.
I think so.
But I mean,
I think
when a situation's that escalated, why would you go get a gun? Because in a heat of a moment, or as court would say, heat of passion, bad things can happen. And here's what doesn't make sense to me with cases like this. And I mean, this isn't the only one. This story can be told several times about crimes across this country. But if somebody's mind is made up to where they're going to leave you, why take their life from them? I mean, it just shows incompetence. That shows being very insecure about yourself. That shows control. That shows being a lunatic, really. I mean, because now you took her life and you're for sure not going to get her.
All because of his ego got hurt a little bit.
Right. I mean, it's an
He could
ego
leave
thing.
her. He could walk out and leave her, but the thought of her walking out and leaving him made him a little bit more mad to walk back inside and get a firearm.
Well, right. But I mean, here's the thing. Like, it's like you're in a fork of a road. You can just say, okay, leave. I'm not going to have you. But he took the road that said, all right, I'm going to kill you and still not going to have you.
Exactly.
Makes no sense. You literally took her life over a situation that was going to lead to her not being with you regardless.
I think if he was as mad as he was, whenever he first left, he should have just left. But he got even more mad that she brought up another man in his bed, that he went back inside and got a firearm for power. Finally, Vincent argued that his trial attorney had been ineffective. Among other complaints, he claimed deputies had improperly removed the bullet from the crime scene with a pocket knife, and that the additional forensic testing involving gunshot residue might have helped his defense. But the appellate court found no evidence that supported those claims. So, without proof that additional investigation would have changed the outcome of the trial, the judges ruled Vincent had failed to demonstrate ineffective assistance of counsel. Every conviction was affirmed. Every appeal failed. The life sentence remained exactly as it had been imposed. Today, Rosemary Sisk's murder is largely forgotten outside Southeast Missouri. It never became a national known case. It never made documentaries or television specials. Yet it reflects a reality that had repeated itself in communities across America for generations. A relationship marked by jealousy, threats that in hindsight carried deadly significance, a woman tried to leave, and a man who decided he'd rather pull a trigger than see her go. So for the people of Bernie on March 10th, 1986, became another date etched into the community's memory. For Rosemary's family, it marked the loss of a daughter, a sister, a mother, a woman whose future was taken from her far too soon. And for us, that's why we like to tell stories like Rosemary's. Not because killers deserve to be remembered, because victims do. And that's the story of Rosemary Sisk.
Rest in peace, Rosemary. You did not deserve to be treated that way by a scumbag of a man that was very insecure about himself, that had a power and ego complex.
Yeah, rest in peace. And, by all accounts, all information about Rosemary is just so positive, and it just tells a story of a woman who persevered, right? She was faced with a lot of things that kind of would break some people, and she just kept going. She worked hard. She took care of her kids. She went to church. She took care of people in nursing homes, and she was very selfless.
What I don't understand about most, domestic issues, if things are getting violent, walk away. I mean, it's
Right.
easier to say as a man because, like, I guess my wife could get mad one day and shoot me. I don't think she ever would.
Right. I don't think so, but
And I understand that there are women that are stuck in certain situations, but please reach out to somebody that can help you.
right.
I just can't stand to see, a woman be stuck in a certain place that needs help that can't get help.
Exactly.
I mean, I'm not that type of guy, so I can't understand, but I just can't understand as a man how you could do that.
Ego. And I think it just boils down to his ego. And the moment that he was already jealous, but the moment he heard her bring up that she had been talking to somebody and already had a plan in place. A lot of men in domestic situations have that power over a woman because that woman has nowhere to go. And whenever Rosemary showed him that she has somewhere to go and she has a plan in place, that shook him to the core. It made him far more mad than he had ever been likely, because he doesn't have that power over her anymore. She doesn't have to come home to his house. Normally, she wouldn't have anywhere to go, but this time she did, and he didn't like that. And that happens a lot. And that's why some domestic situations can be so hard, is because people do feel stuck. They don't know what life looks like not in this relationship. And for Rosemary, she's a widow, she's a mother, she feels stuck. And so it's kind of hard to leave some douchebag if he's the one that likely provides the house or transportation or all those things. Not that I know those things for certain, but I do know in a lot of domestic situations that's how it is. And it holds a lot of women back from breaking through because they feel like they're stuck. And the moment she found a way out, he decided to remove her. That way she couldn't leave.
Very unfortunate story that you brought us. Don't like it at all. Rest in peace, Rosemary again. I just hate this had to happen because it was so senseless. It didn't have to happen. And that's the sad reality of most true crime cases is
Right.
it didn't have to happen.
And my heart breaks for her son.
Absolutely.
To hear a shot in the middle of the night, 2:00, right? And to be woken up and saying, hey, get in the truck. Your mom's been shot. Like, I don't know. At 16, I don't know how I would react. At first, I know my adrenaline would just be so pumped to help my mom. But my mind would be spiraling, right? If that's how you get woken up, I don't know how I would react to. And I've been in situations growing up where, it felt like my life got thrown at me in the middle of the night. Not someone dying, but I feel for him to have to see his mom in that predicament and do everything he could to help, and it still just was out of his control. So yeah, my heart goes out to Rosemary's family and her 4 children and anyone that knew her. And this case is close to home just because I live in Bernie, and so I know a lot of the people that probably were around at that time might still be around and might have stories about Rosemary and her kindness and the person that she was. If you remember this story at all, feel free to let us know how Rosemary was in the comments. We'd like to hear some more about this woman.
And no matter what platform you are listening to us on this week, whether it be YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, any of those platforms, please leave a comment down below and tell us where you're listening from because based on our analytics, we've been getting people listening from all over the place. So
Right.
Just kind of curious on who all's out there and who's listening to Crime Daddies. And secondly, if you want to leave us a 5-star review, that would be very, very greatly appreciated. We can't tell you why it helps us out so much on the algorithm, but it absolutely does. You don't have to tell us anything of significant. You can just say, hey, my favorite food is pizza, and we'll comment back and say, that's an awesome choice of food.
Yeah, and I'll tell you my favorite food. So if you tell me yours, I'll tell you mine. And if you guys like to hear more of these local stories to Southeast Missouri, feel free to just go to the link in our socials and go on the tip line and let us know. Because, like I said, some of these stories just get forgotten due to time. So we'd like to remember the people involved. And so you can find us on social media, Facebook as Crime Daddies, Instagram as Crime Daddies Pod. You can find our website at crimedaddies.riverside.com. And from there, you can find links to all the things that we have. And if you're on the website, go ahead and hit subscribe because we drop some exclusive content on our newsletter on there every month, as well as some fun things like merch and everything. But if you want to go and follow our personal social medias, you can find me on Instagram and TikTok at Jacob W.C. Smith. Facebook is just Jacob Smith. And then for Hunter,
on Facebook, you can find me at Hunter Ben Frampton. On TikTok, you can find me at Simo_Hunter. And on Instagram, you can find me at Hunter.Simo.
Yeah, and so if you guys want to go take a peek at those, there's times where we go in live on Facebook or TikTok and do our episodes on there. So if you want to see those beforehand, that's a fun way to interact with us and see some behind-the-scenes stuff. And it's a good way to reach out to us and have conversations about the things you want to talk about. But other than that, that is Tip Line Volume 3.
And remember, everybody, listen to the crime, don't be the crime.
Appreciate
and don't
y'all.
be a psychopathic man. If you're listening and you're a man, do not be a low-life scumbag to these women out there.
Just be a good dude. It's as simple as that. Just be a good person.
If you want to leave, leave. If she wants to leave, leave. There's no need for any violence along the way. I don't care how much money you have involved. I don't care if there's kids involved. They don't need to go through it either. If it's not working out, separate.
The sun still rises tomorrow. So just move on and figure shit out the next day. But that's all we got for you.
Goodbye.